All right, 1962, Dr. No, James Bond 007. I think this was only the second time that I'd seen this one. I was kind of a late comer when it comes to the Bond films. I think the first one that I'd seen back when it came out would have been A View to a Kill.
Oh,
And I believe I only watched that because I was a huge fan of Duran Duran, and
yeah.
they had done the theme song for it.
Yes, I remember.
Which but this one here, this one felt watching it now felt cheaper, not as much action
Right.
as other Bond films, but still enjoyable. I really like this one.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when I go back to Dr. No, because I always had the same feeling. Well, it was the first one. It wasn't all there yet, and it was cheap, relatively speaking. And then you go back and you watch it, and actually it's pretty entertaining. With Dr. No and From Russia with Love, it's interesting to see how so many of the elements that would later become sort of like the signature elements of the Bond series are already there in some form. I mean, the plot of Dr. No is really the main plot of most of the Bond films. And right from Dr. No, they were going for spectacle. I mean, back in 1962, that ending in Dr. No's headquarters, that was probably pretty spectacular, right? Whether they have a nuclear reactor or something that's
Yeah.
powering. All of that stuff probably was pretty impressive back then.
Five, four, three, two, one, zero. Lift off. Perfect control. 7.46.
Dr. No has little things all through, little grotesque or thrilling or amusing elements, which is really the key to making a good Bond film, I think, is to always have those little odd touches.
Yeah.
The tarantula in the bed, which is kind of silly now, but
Yeah.
back then I'm sure there were people that found it disturbing. Um,
A
and-
real simple story. You're not trying to figure out who the bad guy is. It's just James Bond doing shit.
well, that idea of sort of hiding the villain till the very end
Hmm.
is something that they did fairly consistently. I mean, it was only with the later movies that they started to have the villains more present in the plot earlier in the film.
Yeah.
In this one and in From Russia with Love, Blofeld is largely hidden. Blofeld is hidden completely in Dr. No, but Dr. No is hidden until practically the end.
Yeah.
And the reveal of the villain when it eventually comes is much more effective, I think.
$1 million, Mr. Bond. You were wondering what it cost.
That scene between Dr. No and Bond, where they sit around the table talking about, Dr. No does what the Bond villains always do, which is to sort of try to win Bond over. Hey,
Yeah.
come work with me,
I only gratify your curiosity because you're the one man I've met capable of appreciating what I've done and keeping it to himself.
But that's really a beautifully played scene. Joseph Wiseman had long experience as an actor by that point, and Connery had a certain amount of experience as well. But as the lead in a film like this, it really was remarkable to see how confident he was, how easily he moved into that role.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Mr. Bond.
When you get to the end of that, you don't really feel like he is a bad guy. Is he a bad guy? What's he doing?
Dr. No or Bond?
Yeah, because Dr. No, because you haven't seen him, you haven't heard from him.
Well, he seems to hold the whole area in the grip of fear. They're all terrified of him. And I suppose maybe the one element, unless I'm not remembering, one element that's missing here is that we don't have a scene where the villain proves how nasty he is by brutally murdering one of his henchmen,
Yeah.
dropping them in a piranha pool or something.
Yeah.
But that just wasn't Dr. No's style, I guess. But that's plenty of fun stuff. I think it holds up very nicely. It's quite fun, quite entertaining.
That was the first James Bond movie, but not the first adaptation. That would have been a TV show for Casino Royale, right?
All right. Have you seen it?
No, I've never seen
It's
that.
worth a look, actually. It's pretty good. I mean, that was live television. And it was Barry Nelson, actually, who I guess went on to be the guy at the Shining Hotel, right? Wasn't that Barry
Right,
Nelson?
yeah.
And he's playing American James Bond. They switched the roles, James Bond being American and Felix Leiter being a Brit.
All right. If I don't kill the chief, what do I do to him?
His weak spot is gambling. You're going to play baccarat with him, and your job is to clean him out.
So it switched from the normal that Felix Leiter is an American CIA agent. Peter Lorre, always fun to watch. He plays the villain.
It's a very handy little tool. Serves all sorts of purposes. Oh, my little friend, you remember the one that had a gun that passed for a cane? Oh, he was an expert with his.
The plot is essentially what you see in the Daniel Craig movie. It's pretty close to the book. So I know a lot of people probably be put off because it's a live TV show from the 50s. But I think it is quite good, actually. It's quite well worth a watch. Dr. No, well, Bond as a series, there's so many influences from other things that I don't think we can say that Dr. No was completely original. I'm sure audiences were sort of familiar with the type of movie that it was supposed to be, even back in 1962. And we talked about how similar the plots of the Bond films, if there are more than one, are to Alfred Hitchcock's films. The Man Who Knew Too Much and 39 Steps, and of course North by Northwest and To Catch a Thief. Those films are almost like dry runs for the Bond series. And Cary Grant was at least briefly considered by Cubby Broccoli because he was a friend for the role of Bond, but he was too old to do a series, right? At that point, I think he was like 55 or 56.
Yeah.
So they did a movie every 2 years, and he wouldn't have been able to get Cary Grant to commit to a series anyway. So he would have been recasting the role for every film. Still would be fun to see. But in a way, if you watch Notorious, you've already seen Cary Grant as James Bond.
Yeah.
And they seem to be imitating in the Bond films, not just that character or his suave, dry humor and charm, but also even the look of the film and the locations they used and the way they shot it seems to mirror Hitchcock's films, particularly To Catch a Thief, but also North by Northwest. He's not really a Bondian character there.
Right.
Although he is wearing the gray suit that Sean Connery seemed to wear in quite a few of the Bond films. I think one of the reasons why Bond is so difficult to put over in the same way now is because so many things that were trappings of those films for years, like the wearing of the suit, the fact that he wears a suit, as he goes about his normal day business rather than wearing t-shirt and jeans, as a modern person would do, that in itself is something from a fairly distant past.
Yeah, I noticed in the beginning, in the opening with the barrel thing, he had the hat on. I was like, oh, come on.
Well, he also, and for quite a while, I don't know if they did in the Daniel Craig movies because I haven't seen all of them, but for quite a while, whenever he would enter the office, he would toss his hat,
But yeah.
catch on the hat ring, even if he wasn't wearing a hat for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
He would always show up with a hat in that scene to do that, traditional toss. Yeah, Dr. No isn't my favorite, but it's certainly a pleasant, easy watch. And it always hits me when I watch it, how there are some people that just seem to be destined to be stars.
Yeah.
And right from that first moment in the casino, when he introduces himself, you say, oh, this guy, he's going to go places, and it's amazing that somebody could have that sort of mastery of the technique of screen acting, but also the complete confidence in the character. I should say, there are some scenes where he seems very loud and aggressive and almost shouting orders at people.
Offshore islands. You found nothing?
Not a thing.
Where did you look?
Just about most everywhere. Fire Island, Crab Key, Morgan's Reef.
Checked them all thoroughly?
All except Crab Key. We didn't have no right to go there.
Why not?
It belongs to a Chinese.
Get her, Quarrel. And the camera.
That he almost seemed like an American.
Yeah.
But I assume that those scenes were shot before it clicked with them that he has to be, a charming guy with a little bit of wit rather than just a brute. Because it's surprising when you read the reviews from the time that it came out, it's surprising to see what an issue the violence was. The scene that seemed to be particularly troubling to the people that were bothered by it was the scene where he shoots the guy in the back. You know, after he's sort of interviewed him, the guy goes for his gun and Bond shoots him and gets him down on the ground, and then he puts the rest of his bullets into the guy's back. And that was considered particularly shocking. I don't know how many times they edited it and re-edited it. That's probably a whole story in itself. But he shot him more times, and then they edited it down to a few less shots. But apparently the idea of somebody shooting, emptying the gun into the back of somebody when they're lying on the ground just struck a lot of people the wrong way.
Yeah.
But
I think the only thing that got me was like that I wasn't expecting was the John Kitzmiller guy being burned to death with
yes.
the flame tank. I wasn't expecting that. Because the rest of the movie didn't have that
It wasn't as
it
nasty.
didn't have that feel, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, I'm appreciative of the fact that he shows some sympathy for the guy after he did. He does.
Sorry we ain't got any flowers. Come on, let's go.
But it does sort of float close to the more troubling racial aspects of the character.
Yeah.
When he tells the guy at one point, fetch my shoes.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't play too well nowadays. But actually, largely, I think they managed to avoid it being too outrageously racist. There are a few scenes there where I think they do sort of like the boggle eye thing when he sees a crab walking in front of him.
Yeah.
That was probably ill-advised.
I think most of the Asian characters in this movie were Americans and had to wear
Yes.
appliances to
Yes.
become Asian. So
Well, Joseph Wiseman has no Asian blood in him at all.
You wanted your own place, I helped you set up. You wanted Mexico, it was Mexico. You wanted Paris, I financed you. Money every week, from which I see very little in the way of returns. No, sonny boy, it doesn't come this easy. For a few extra bucks, I stand on my sick feet and I lecture an hour and a half to the Hadassah ladies.
And I think he was smart not to try to play the character as an Asian.
yeah.
I think in the book, if I remember correctly, he's only half Asian, half Chinese.
Yeah, and half German.
All right. So I guess that's the wiggle room that they used to hire a white actor. I think one of the women is Jamaican. The Jamaican characters, I think those are legitimately Jamaican actors. But the women that are wearing the little thing on their eyes, they're obviously not Chinese. Fleming said in an interview that he had based the Bond character on two other characters in fiction. He said it was Bulldog Drummond from the waist up and Mickey Splain's Mike Hammer from the waist down. And most people probably aren't familiar nowadays with Bulldog Drummond.
All right.
And it goes to show you how fleeting fame can be. Bulldog Drummond and the books that were written by the fellow, I think he used the pen name Sapper. And it was an enormously popular series of books. And they made what seemed to be an endless number of movies. Started in the earliest days of the talkies, 1929. Ronald Colman did what probably was the best, a movie called Bulldog Drummond. And that character seemed to lay the groundwork for almost all the action heroes that came afterwards. Drummond was an officer, and he has the team of folks around him that were his friends in the First World War.
Like that. How's the disguise now? Quite perfect, sir. Good. And I'll trouble you for the fur coat and the pair of gloves.
And he's looking for action, you know, he wants adventure.
I'm coming with you to look after you. Wrong again, Algy. I'm the one that's bored with life, not you. I'm the one that's looking for a thrill, not you. This is my adventure, my boy, not yours.
And the list of people that played Bulldog Drummond over the years, they were still doing them in the 60s, believe it or not. And I don't think any of them were particularly successful in that later date, but the early ones were successful. Ronald Colman, who was considered one of the best British actors of the screen back in his time. Ray Milland, who we know from Columbo and also Hitchcock's, what was it, Dial M for Murder. And Walter Pidgeon. Walter Pidgeon played Dr. Morbius in Forbidden Planet and a million other things. He was around quite a bit. Bulldog Drummond had many of the elements, including the evil villains.
I really never noticed Miss Phyllis until this evening. Fortunately, there's time to rectify that oversight. Oh, stop that, you dirty swine!
This was also something I guess Bulldog Drummond took from Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu. I'm not so sure about who started their series first, but I don't know if you're familiar with Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu character.
Yeah.
Series of novels, very popular. There's a Bond character, somebody who's working for the British. I don't know if it's British Secret Service or for the Scotland Yard, and he's always going up against Fu Manchu. Fu Manchu was always coming up with new schemes.
Right.
And I forget the name of the hero character, but it's a very similar dynamic. And Dr. No, I think you could say probably Dr. No is an attempt to, sort of benefit from the popularity that the Fu Manchu character still had in 1962. And the Fu Manchu character actually still had that popularity until Peter Sellers, in his last film, played Fu Manchu in a comedy. And it seemed like everybody in the world suddenly woke up and said, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Get this British guy, make him believe he's a Chinese guy, and we're supposed to accept that.
You have hard my life away.
Mercy! Master! Mercy! Mercy!
Ishmael, torture him. Bury him alive in the red anthill. Also, sever his left ear like Van Gogh.
And Peter Sellers was very entertaining in all the movies he did, but that was a very unwise choice.
Yeah.
He did Charlie Chan in Murder by Death, and I think probably because that's a much better film, it's a much funnier film, and the performance is much more respectful. People sort of accepted that, they let that slide.
Yeah.
There's the thing about British actors, Peter Ustinov has this problem as well, that they never seem to be able to turn down the opportunity to play other races, particularly Asian characters or Indian characters. And I guess they think it's a great knee slapper, but it doesn't go over too well anymore.
No.
Anyway, so Bulldog Drummond was the character that most people, despite the enormous popularity of the character back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, he's now virtually unknown.
Right.
The other character probably is familiar to modern audiences, Mike Hammer, because there's been a number of TV shows. Darren McGavin did a Mike Hammer TV show.
So you think they went down the fire escape, huh?
Well, they must have.
How'd they get up here, Gus?
Well, same way, I guess.
You're lying. You know those two goons are up here. What were they doing up here?
I don't know.
You're lying. You've been lying from everything. I said, how does Lee Chu figure in this?
The Stacy Keach.
Yeah.
He was Mike Hammer for a while on television. I think that probably was the longest run, if I'm not mistaken.
We were in the chips, the hard way.
A whole bunch of people who played the character. There was a famous movie done by Robert Aldridge that was influential to some extent to Quentin Tarantino when he did Pulp Fiction. It was Kiss Me Deadly.
Yeah.
And I forget the name of the actor that played Mike Hammer in it, but he was very good because he was a real obnoxious, aggressive jerk.
May I help you, sir?
This key, what's it for?
Are you a member, sir?
No, just tell me about the key.
Pardon me, sir, if you're not a member. My dear sir.
Now tell me about the key.
And that was Mike Hammer. The reason why Ian Fleming said that was because Bulldog Drummond was a fairly chaste character. He wasn't running around sleeping with all the women. I don't think that would have been acceptable back in the 20s when the guy was writing the novels. It certainly wouldn't have been acceptable in movies. But by the time we got around to Mike Hammer, I guess he started writing those novels in the 40s, late 40s. And, the lid was off as far as sexual stuff, particularly in popular fiction. So he was suggesting that he has Bulldog Drummond's brains and he has Mike Hammer's sexual promiscuity.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, we have to take the guy at his word. He says that that's what he based it on, so I guess that's what he based it on. But there were a number of other action or adventure characters that were popular back then. The Saint, of course, the series of Saint books and movies preceded James Bond by, I think, a decade or more.
Right.
And George Sanders, of course, was the most famous guy to play the Saint before Roger Moore did it in the 60s.
Who are you? I might have known.
I don't think you're trying. You haven't made a kill all day.
The truth is, I'm not a very expert marksman.
Oh, come on. Surely no one can ever say that about the famous Simon Templar.
For me as a kid, there was no question that it was an acceptable choice that Roger Moore should become James Bond, because as far as I could see, the Saint show, which was on constantly in reruns, was sort of like a little James Bond movie every week.
Yeah.
Oh, here we have an appearance by
Oh yeah.
Lofeld's cat has appeared. You should have him sitting on your lap throughout
Yeah, I know.
Perhaps that's the thing that makes Bond tolerable, is that the brutality, like shooting somebody in the back after they're all laying on the ground, is tolerable because he does it, with a little droll comment and lighting another cigarette and having, a little gin. It just seems so civilized, which is another thing that upset the critics at the time, that they felt that they were sort of making brutality seem attractive or sexy. But I thought that was the whole idea of the Bond series.
Oh yeah.
But
yes. I mean, after he kills the chauffeur and he pulls up and he tells the the guy standing there, make sure he doesn't get away. Like,
right, yes.
Of course, he didn't kill that guy.
He didn't kill him, but,
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
He's making light of a corpse in his car. Yeah, well, I mean, I feel that the Bond films are, of course, supposed to be fantasies, and I think it's pretty clear that they always intended them. It's only a relatively recent thing that they've decided that they want these to be realistic in any way. Now, they went too far in some instances, even with some of the Sean Connery films. I think you could say they went too far with some of the humor. But generally speaking, I would prefer it to be a little on the silly side rather than on the depressing and grim side. So I'm probably showing my age because I have a fear, although maybe that's changing now. I see the superhero movies are becoming much more colorful and lighthearted.
Yeah, I think the lighter feel of these films, I think, works better.
Yeah. Goldfinger is actually my favorite of all, to be honest. And I think Thunderball and From Russia with Love probably would be the next ones. And Dr. No is in that group as well. Diamonds Are Forever and You Only Live Twice. Maybe not so much. Maybe with You Only Live Twice, you start to see the thing becoming so bloated that it starts to lose a little bit of the element of fun. And Diamonds Are Forever, that was when they really got into moving in the direction, in actually two new things that they were focusing on, which was to have extended action scenes, which had not really been a focus of the films previously. There was action, of course, but the idea of stopping the story to have a long car chase, they didn't do that in the early movies. The action was sort of integrated into the story. But by the time they get to Diamonds Are Forever, you see them starting to do stuff that's similar to Bullet.
Yeah.
Where you have like a 8-minute car chase or some sort of show-stopping stunt. And that really became the style going forward. During the Roger Moore years, that was pretty much the way those movies went. It was a big stunt or action scene every 15 minutes or so. And that's fine. I mean, I can enjoy that too, if the stunts are really thrilling.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, this one here, the Dr. No, the one car chase scene, I noticed the rear projection looked really horrible.
Yeah.
Like the truck chasing him was like gigantic.
Big.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
a lot of the sets were like the Moneypenny's office. You could, it was just like cardboard sets and stuff, but
It definitely looks like sets, yeah. The breakthrough, because John, I'm trying to remember who's the production designer for this. Oh, it was Ken Adams. Well, it was Ken Adams, I think, because he's the guy that went on and did some of the Stanley Kubrick's movies, like Dr. Strangelove.
Okay, yeah.
And I read that he had to sort of throw together that set when Dr. No's flunky is coming in and getting a tarantula.
Yeah.
If you remember, the set is like a big round grid on the ceiling, throwing a shadow on the wall. But otherwise, the room is completely bare, with just a stand in the foreground with the tarantula on it. Yeah. And that knocked everybody out at the time, because that was simply considered so, minimal and yet so effective and so dramatic. And it emphasizes the fantasy element, which was what makes me appreciate it. Bond series stopped being Bond when they lost Ken Adam, when they lost Sean Connery, and when they lost John Barry, the guy who wrote the scores.
Yeah.
He didn't die, but they moved on to other people. And they still had some good scores, but they were usually scores that were sort of imitating John Barry's scores. So when you lost the sets, the great sets, and you lost the guy who probably was the best Bond, and we'll even throw Roger Moore in. We say, okay, Sean Connery or Roger Moore. When you lost those two guys and you lost the sets and you lost the music, not really Bond anymore,
Right.
People complain about Thunderball. They say, oh, those underwater scenes are too long and they're boring. I didn't think so. I thought they were very good, very exciting and spectacular. But at least you could say that in that case, they actually had people in the water. Masses of people. When they did On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a film that I think is wildly overpraised by people, they were doing ski stuff using the rear screen stuff that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Why would anybody find a skiing scene with people standing in front of a screen? Why would anybody find that thrilling? And that film, we could do a whole nother episode on why I dislike that film.
Yeah.
I think what happened there is that it might be an early example of the sort of hipster tendency to say, whatever one you didn't see, that's the best one. You haven't seen the series. And it isn't. It's a very clunky, boring, drawn out film. And the guy who has to, and I can't blame him because he was taking on quite a job for a guy who wasn't an actor, to replace Sean Connery, he just doesn't register at all. And you can see the director and the editor doing everything they can to cut around him so that we don't even hear him finish a single line of dialogue.
Yeah.
Cut to the next. But there's all sorts of imperfections with that film. The plot, the meandering plot, I still can't figure out what was Blofeld trying to do. It had something to do with giving cologne or perfume sprays that would control people or kill people. To a bunch of beautiful women. So the whole movie really is George Lazenby going around in a kilt, and his voice seems to change constantly because they apparently completely looped him. So sometimes it's him being looped as James Bond with his normal British accent, and sometimes it's him being looped as James Bond making believe he's a Scottish guy. But it always sounds fake. He never seems to be the voice never seems to be in the same room with the actor. And the idea of taking the one person that we would have, well, especially me, because I'm a great fan of the Avengers, the one person you would have really liked to see all through the movie, Diana Rigg, and sort of dropping her off at one point and not getting her back into the story until it's practically over.
All right.
And the notion that people would think that this is somehow a more mature or powerful, dramatically powerful film, just because they shoot her at the end. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen the film from 1967. That to me seems ridiculous, you know. And it's particularly inappropriate because I guess President Kennedy was shot 1965 or 4.
Yeah.
And of course, the Bond series got off the ground because of something that John Kennedy said. He said in an interview that one of the books that he was reading was From Russia with Love. So that immediately became the second film that they rushed into production. He hadn't said that, I guess, by the time they did Dr. No, but they rushed From Russia with Love into production after that interview came out. So Kennedy, his look and his style and his sense of humor were sort of Bondian, even though he was an American. And he was youthful, which is another aspect, I think, of Bond. You can imagine a young British men after the war wanting to go a little bit wild in terms of drink and women and buying fancy sport cars and having all those things like the elaborate wristwatches and the beautiful suits and everything. There was a hunger for that after the deprivations of the Second World War. I mean, England really got the shit kicked out of it during the war, right? It was we never experienced that in the United States. We actually had people firing missiles at our cities. So to take a character like that and to say, this time we're going to do something profound, you make a movie, which is one opportunity for people to escape a world that seems to be spinning out of control, with the presidents being assassinated and others being assassinated, and the Vietnam War, and protests in the streets, and the hippies, and the drugs, and all of this sort of stuff. And people can say, well, at least I can go and see a Bond movie.
All right, yeah.
And they have to kill the character at the end. No point to that, right? There's no point, really, to be honest. There was no point in having that character in the film at all. It might have made sense in the book, because from reading Ian Fleming's interviews, he had, like Raymond Chandler, he had a desire to write something that would be taken seriously by the critics. They weren't taken seriously by the critics because they were writing stuff that, you know, seemed by its very nature not to be worthy of serious consideration. I like Ian Fleming's books. I think he's a good writer. I always enjoy going back and reading the Bond books. You have to skip over some parts. But generally speaking, they're very entertaining. And same is true of Raymond Chandler. I think he's absolutely one of my favorite writers. But their aspirations to make the characters, their books a little more sophisticated, and make them a little more of interest to the critics, that really is their business. When you're making movies, you have a different agenda. And I think the Bond films that have been made since Daniel Craig took over, that's not his fault, of course, they're trying far too hard to be realistic, and they're never going to be. You can do a Bond film and have any of the expected elements and also make it into a gritty espionage thriller. If you want to do gritty espionage, you do Jean Le Carré.
Yeah.
Right. And people were doing it. Even back in the 60s, they were doing this. Bio Came In From the Cold and other movies based on Le Carré's books. But Bond films are supposed to be, as Sean Connery once said, supposed to be a pleasure cruise. You're not supposed to have to worry about the realities of life.
Yeah.
And one of the pleasures of those type of movies is that you know the character, the lead character, the person you're following is always going to get out of whatever difficult spot that he gets into. And I suppose you could say this fetish that some modern filmmakers have for killing off beloved characters is really just a sign of their desperation. I mean, a lot of the people that are directing and writing the latest Bond movies, they're pretty well established, pretty well respected people. I always think you should get folks that perhaps aren't quite as admired. Get somebody who's just, well, I won't say a hack, Get somebody who's just a clever writer of action thrillers. You're going to get something much closer to the mark because they're trying their best to entertain people. Whereas these other guys, they look down their nose at this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're making movies that are supposed to deconstruct the genre or make us realize how ridiculous the idea of that type of character is in the modern world. And that's all tired horseshit. We don't go to these movies believing them. We don't need a director to tell us that this is nonsense. We want a director who is willing to immerse himself completely in the absurdity of it and come up with something imaginative and thrilling. And the one thing I would say about Moonraker, which was considered kind of a low mark for the series, there's a lot of things in that film that are wonderful, and they are genuinely thrilling. If the editor had simply cut out the more ridiculous things, you might have had one of the best of the more Bond films. And now I see a lot more people saying that. So a lot of time, for a long time there, if you ever said you like Moonraker, just destroyed your credibility.
I guess at this point too, they hadn't really worked in all the gadgets and stuff.
Yeah, they have fairly minimal gadgets, right? I mean, the big gadget in this one, I guess, is him getting his new gun.
Yeah, that and him using a piece of his hair to make sure to see if he could detect somebody getting into his closet.
Right. From Russia with Love, they started to bring in more of the gadgets and things. I guess From Russia with Love was the first film Q shows up in, right?
Yeah.
And in this one, they just have some sort of generic armory guy. I don't even know if he has a name in it. He's the guy that shows Bond the new gun. By the way, this is the only piece of merchandise that I have. I don't know what this came with. I think Corgi, or one of the companies that made toy cars, may have made a set of figures like this maybe to go along with their car set.
Yeah.
I can't figure out how he would fit in a car.
In a car, yeah.
That's Joseph Wiseman. I think this has been repainted a few times over the years, but that's the only merchandise I have from Dr. No. I'm actually surprised that I have that.
Yeah, I'm surprised there wasn't any toys.
This
really
might have come
wasn't
a long
aimed
way.
towards children, right?
Well, they were, surprisingly.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think they really got into selling the toys until Goldfinger, I think, probably was the one, or Thunderball. Those were the big, massive hits where merchandising. And I guess what they did is they reached back to the earlier films to say, okay, put those out as well, right? But yeah, they very definitely.
I know there was a comic book after Dr. No, right?
Well, there was actually
a comic strip.
That preceded Dr. No.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And the remarkable thing about that is the way the artist drew Bond, he looks very much like Sean Connery.
Yeah.
I think it started well before the Bond films were produced. Ian Fleming said that his ideal for Bond would have been Hoagie Carmichael. He was sort of like a music guy. I guess he was a piano player and a composer, and I guess he did a few movies. But when you see pictures of him, you say, oh, yeah, I could see where Ian Fleming was thinking of. He doesn't look anything like Sean Connery, really, but he looks like a sort of generic version. Like if you were doing a Bond-related thing, like merchandise or something like that, or a comic book, and you didn't want to use Sean Connery, or you couldn't use Sean Connery, then that would be the sort of look you would go for. Because sometimes they do have to do that,
Yeah.
Sometimes they have. This was true of Columbo too. Have you ever seen the board game they put out for Columbo? Peter Falk wouldn't give his permission to allow his face to be used. So they have a picture of the back of Columbo, back of his raincoat and his head, So it's completely, you can't see any resemblance to Peter Falk. And they put a big police shield, because Columbo, the police shield was always the most important thing.
Yeah.
But that's how they got around that. But anyway, where does that leave us? Yeah, they had a lot of toys. They had a lot of merchandising. And that might have been one of the big merchandising things in movies before Star Wars came along, because they merchandised the shit out of that. I remember seeing lunch boxes when I was in first and second grade that I would have killed to.
Oh yeah.
But I wasn't so fortunate. I think that's the great thing about the Bond series, is that it seems like an entire world that you can get lost in, you know.
Yeah.
And the problem with doing the movies now is that a lot of stuff that they focused on back in those movies was really a world that was on its way out in the late 50s or in the early 60s, certainly by the mid 60s. You know, we talked about the idea of everybody going around in a suit all the time or wearing a hat.
Yeah.
Or the way you see people behave in a casino, you know. I mean, the American casino that you see in Diamonds Are Forever is much closer to reality now, and I imagine it's probably that way in Europe as well. So by the time they got to Diamonds Are Forever, they'd come up with this idea that they were now going to start playing the Bond character as an eccentric, like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
So he would be showing up in inappropriate places wearing a tuxedo and things like that. And to try to juice the humor out of that. He just doesn't fit in. He sort of sticks out.
Yeah.
I think that Bond always works best when he is perfectly at ease and fits in perfectly with his environment. He knows just what to wear, just what to drink. You know, he has all those little things. That's what we like about the character. It's sort of a competence envy, or the fetishism of competence.
Yeah.
We like to see somebody who really knows what they're doing. You know, it gives us something to aspire to, right? I know I'm never going to be as suave as Bond. I'm never going to know exactly what type of wine to drink with my meat or my fish. So it's nice to see somebody who has all of that taken care of, you know. He throws that off effortlessly. And in Casino Royale, in the book, he's like learning the card game, like, you know, shortly before he's playing the villain, you know, figuring out not just how to play the game, but also how to cheat and win. And that's, you know, we admire a character like that. If you were doing a heist movie, if you have a bunch of inept criminals, it's not really very fun, you know.
Right.
Or if it's just something like robbing a liquor store, you know, that's not entertaining. But something that happens on a sort of global scale with, you know, evil villains that are trying to take over the world, or, you know, and the fact that just the idea that a guy who's trying to knock down American spaceships, rocket ships, and, is sitting talking to Bond about Don Perignon, don't break the Don Perignon.
Yeah.
And Bond has a comeback. I forget which year he likes best.
Yeah.
It's a Dom Perignon 55. It would be a pity to break it.
I prefer the 53 myself.
And that might have also contributed to this feeling that Bond is sort of a heartless fellow, because he's getting up and he's grabbing the bottle because they're dragging away Ursula Andress, presumably to molest her. He gets forced back into his chair, and Dr. No says, well, you don't want to destroy that. It's Don Perignon, whatever year. And he says, oh, I prefer the whatever year.
Yeah.
And, you know, he seems completely unruffled and unfazed by it. The plot of Dr. No, the basic idea of an evil villain trying to interfere with U.S. rocket launches is something that we saw several times, variations on that several times. The plot of Thunderball was about them trying to steal nuclear weapons by downing an American or British bomber jet. And of course, in films like Moonraker, I'm forgetting, you only live twice. They're actually snatching the rockets after they've been launched, snatching them out of the air and bringing them down. And then Spy Who Loved Me had a similar thing with, water-based, with a big ocean tanker that opens up and swallows submarines. And then Moonraker, they're stealing space shuttles. So that's a plot that they've done quite often in the film, and it always is sort of pleasing. I think that's another thing. People say, well, they stopped being original. They really never were original, but there's something pleasing about finding a variation on these old themes. And you realize that there are certain stories that the cinematic Bond character, rather than the book Bond, works best in. You know, we really don't want to see him doing, you know, John le Carre type stuff. I love John le Carre's books, and I love some of the movies that have been made of his books. But we have that's something different. We want a certain type of action and adventure from a Bond film. So that's where I feel in recent years maybe they went astray.
Yeah, kind of refreshing to see like a good guy, bad guy relationship where James Bond doesn't know who the hell this guy is. You know what I'm saying? Where nowadays it'd be like you'd find out later on that they were ex-partners and
right. His long lost brother. This may be the one thing that they can't fix, is that we are now so familiar with these characters that there's never going, it's sort of similar to what we were talking about with Star Wars. You can never go back to the feeling of potential.
Yeah.
The promise that the first film had is not something you can ever repeat, because it was actually new at that time. And with this film and From Russia with Love, and then with Goldfinger, which I think was the peak, you have things that the audience was seeing for the first time. It had a freshness to it. It had its influences, but it still, they were able to make it fresh by the wonderful music, those Murray Spinder opening title scenes, the gun sight opening, all of those little touches made people feel like they were seeing something that was really modern and fresh, you know, and exciting. And I don't think you can't really repeat that. You can't go back to it. Nowadays, I guess for most people, even though the Bond films are successful, I guess most people, when they think of really great action films, they think of John Wick movies, or they think of Mission Impossible movies. But the Bond films, I suppose now they have to disappoint on some level. They're never going to be able to be what they were, you know. I sometimes wonder if maybe there would have been some benefit to having somebody like Quentin Tarantino come in and freshen things up.
Yeah.
But maybe even he would have found that it's a hopeless task.
Yeah.
One of the things about the casting of the Bond character is almost from the start, there's always been this talk about who they're considering. There was talk about Cary Grant and David Niven and other people like that being considered before Connery was chosen. But actually, Richard Johnson, who we as horror film fans would know as the star of Fulci's zombie movie,
Mm-hmm.
he was also the star of The Haunting. He did 2 Bulldog Drummond movies in the 60s. I just watched them, actually. They're on Tubi. One's called Deadlier Than the Male, and the other one's called Some Girls Do, something like that. They're terrible.
Yeah.
They look like they were done as TV pilots, to be honest. Richard Johnson was so similar to Connery in terms of his facial appearance, his facial structure, and the eyebrows, that in some of the shots, you almost think you're watching outtakes from a Bond film.
Right.
But the problem with him is he was a very, physically, he wasn't very, very imposing fellow. There's a couple of scenes in it where he has his shirt off. They're trying to do like the sort of scenes that Connery would do with the girls, you know, cuddling with them in bed. Well, I don't know if Connery was ever doing cuddling in bed with the women. And his physique was so scrawny and puny, you know, that I thought to myself, gee, they really should put a shirt on this guy. You know? So he didn't really work as a Bondian character, but it was interesting to see them decide at that point to say, we got the Bulldog Drummond name, maybe there's somebody who remembers this character, so let's do a sort of Bond version of Bulldog Drummond. But they're pretty terrible, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, other people that have been considered, it's a very lengthy list of folks. I wonder sometimes if they didn't sort of leak those things to the press, just as a sort of tip of the hat to some actor that they liked, or somebody that had had done them a favor of some kind, or some just folks that maybe they knew and wanted to give them a little help in their career, because it's an almost endless list. We spoke about how the guy who played Janet Leigh's boyfriend in Psycho, get his name, John Calvin or something like that.
Yeah.
He actually was signed to play Bond when Sean Connery said he wasn't coming back for Diamonds Are Forever. And he would have been Bond. He would have been the first American Bond, I guess. Except Connery came back at the last minute. They said, give him whatever he wants to get him back. So he actually got that far. But there are a lot of other people whose names were simply mentioned, and I don't think they ever seriously considered them. And there are other people that seem to always be on the waiting list. And some of them got to play, like Timothy Dalton. He was considered fairly early, and he only got to play it fairly late, in the series. Roger Moore also.
Didn't he replace somebody who got the part but then fell ill or something?
Well, I think
I heard that.
I think they originally reached out to Pierce Brosnan, and Pierce Brosnan couldn't do it because he was
doing the show.
Remington Steele,
yeah.
Which must have pissed him off terribly at the time.
Yeah.
But he, fortunately for him, he ended up getting the part after Timothy Dalton left. Timothy Dalton did 2 movies, and I guess there was some problem with the rights to the character, and they took a hiatus. They were out of production for a couple of years, and I guess when they went back, they decided to have a fresh start. So Timothy Dalton moved on, and they brought in Pierce Brosnan. I didn't dislike Timothy Dalton, but I have to say I like him a lot better in other movies.
Yeah.
I don't like Flash Gordon. But it seems to me he's a lot more charming and dashing in Flash Gordon than he ever was really as Bond. Timothy Dalton, I think, is an early example of what maybe Daniel Craig fell for as well. This idea that if you're an established, respected British actor, that you have to find something in this character. And what they miss is the fact that all the people that had the greatest success playing this character, or characters like them, were just personally charming. People like seeing them. The character was a secondary thing. As far as I'm concerned, I like Daniel Craig as an actor, but he doesn't have the same sort of charm, and he's just not not as entertaining to watch. In other roles, like Timothy Dalton, in other roles, he actually is more charming and more fun to watch. Like the things he's having success with now, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be wild if that's the character he's playing now in these detective movies? They've done 2 of them now.
The Knives Out.
Knives Out, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be funny if those continue on and they become successful? And years from now, people think of him not as James Bond, but as that character.
Yeah.
That would be kind of cute. But anyway, it may be that by the time Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan got to play the character, that whole world, that fantasy world that they had created in the earlier films, there was nothing really like that in the real world anymore. There was no, the European casino nightlife, that all that sort of vanished or was cheapened. I mean, when Trump is opening golf clubs and casinos, not quite the same, right? It's a different world. And the mode of dress, back then people always knew what to wear for dinner and if you're going to a casino or if you're going to the theater or whatever. And in the early Bond films, you get the impression that even the villains pay attention to how they're supposed to be dressed. But now we live in an informal age, and all those things have gone by the wayside.
Yeah, I really like GoldenEye. I think GoldenEye was a good one.
I've heard a lot of people
say
it
had a good balance of newer stuff, but still had the that old feel of the older movies too. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, Pierce Brosnan should have been a great Bond. I suppose there are a lot of people who grew up with the Pierce Brosnan Bonds that probably feel he is Bond. I always liked Pierce Brosnan as well. He is a charming actor. I think he probably, in the charm sweepstakes, he probably
Yeah.
beats Daniel Craig a little bit. But when they were making the Pierce Brosnan films, and I haven't seen GoldenEye in a while, so maybe I should go back on your recommendation. I'll go back and watch it and see if I enjoy it. But there's another aspect. When Pierce Brosnan took over, they had entered by that point into the home video age. So the way they were shooting the movies seemed to be less spectacular. It wasn't the sort of grand scope that the films had from Thunderball on when they first started shooting movies in widescreen. The Brosnan Bond films, I don't know, they seem a little cheapy to me. They had some great stunts. They kept that, but you also do start to see that bit of pretension creeping in with the business about Judi Dench as him, telling him that he's a dinosaur and all that sort of thing.
Right.
And even in the Timothy Dalton movies, they started to put all these disclaimers at the end that we don't endorse the use of tobacco, and we don't shoot anybody.
Yeah.
That sort of makes you feel that maybe the world of Bond has passed. For me, Goldfinger is the movie that I feel is a delight from beginning to end.
Yeah.
The level of energy, the music is so wonderful. Everything just seems perfect,
Yeah.
And I don't think they ever hit that height again. Thunderball I like, but I admit there are some draggy scenes. Probably could have been edited a little bit. You Only Live Twice has got a lot of problems, including the race thing creeping in again, with them making Sean Connery up as a Japanese, which doesn't really even make sense. And Roald Dahl was the author of the screenplay, or one of the authors of the screenplay for You Only Live Twice. So I don't know what that tells us, except that he came up with this really loopy plot where James Bond is impersonating a Japanese man, and they suggest that they're doing like plastic surgery to him to give him the eyes.
Right.
Although later, when he's discovered by Blofeld, all of that disappears. His hair goes back to normal. There's nothing on his head. So I guess that was just makeup. Anyway, it's a ridiculous idea, because whether you gave Sean Connery plastic surgery or makeup, he is never going to pass as a Japanese man. Right?
Yeah.
So 6'2" or 6'4", hairy Scottish guy, there's no hope. All he would have to do is open his mouth and say something, and the gig would be up. Anyway, that film was the one, I guess, where Sean Connery decided he didn't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And after that, he quit. And that's when we got George Lazenby, who I think was pretty much a washout. His case is an interesting one. He apparently became convinced, or somebody convinced him, apparently he had a guru, that the Bond thing was, get out of that, man. That's old stuff.
Yeah.
And he bailed on it, even though apparently they would have had him back. They had a lot of trouble with him. He was a really obnoxious guy, apparently. But they were willing to have him back, if what I read is correct. And he passed on it. Boy, how much do you feel, right? To lose a part like, or maybe it was just a question of somebody with a really severe case of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
He knew he wasn't doing a good job, and he just couldn't put up with the agony of going through it again. There's little things in that film that always strike me as being kind of odd. Like, if you were trying to do a film that was supposed to be a serious take on the Bond stories, why would you start it with the character breaking the fourth wall and making a joke about the actor that played the part previously?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a smart move, right? And why they would think that we would get all emotional. He quits the service for a little while. He hands in his resignation, and they have a scene of him going and taking stuff out of his drawer, all his mementos of his past adventures. And there are things like Honey Rider's knife and other things. I don't remember exactly. I know he had Honey Rider's knife from Dr. No. But you think to yourself, isn't that silly? This is a film where we're supposed to be taking the character seriously, and we're supposed to believe that when he resigns from the service, the first thing he'll think to do is go and collect all the things that people used to try to kill him. those are the things that he keeps in his drawer.
Seems like a scene you would see in like a Naked Gun.
Yes, exactly. Yes, very much. But the one thing I say about Bond, he can't be a sentimental character.
Right. Yeah.
You don't want him being sentimental. And that, of course, is the great sin of on Her Majesty's Secret Service. I don't know why it is so many intelligent people seem to fall for that and think that that's somehow an important movie because Bond cries over his dead wife. It's insulting to the audience, I think.
Yeah.
We got this perfectly ridiculous movie, and at the end we'll kill somebody, and you're supposed to go, hey! Doesn't work for me. I don't know what sort of magic it's working on other people, but in a way it's sort of similar, I think, to the effect that the Spanish language version of Dracula has. I think another topic that we've talked about. Things like this feeling that people have. They look up to these characters, they admire them, but they recognize that the character is sort of tied to one actor. And as long as that actor is playing the part, then I, as a viewer, can never really fantasize about being that character, right?
Yeah.
I can't fantasize about being James Bond because only one person can be James Bond. They even used to advertise it as Sean Connery is James Bond.
Right.
Not Sean Connery as James Bond. So when you finally see a movie where they have this non-entity playing Bond, and it's still a Bond movie, you say, oh yeah, there's hope for me, right? I can dream of being James Bond because they got this guy to play the character, and it still feels like a Bond movie. They still got the same beautiful music and beautiful women. I don't know how far I can stretch this because I don't know if there are many people that dreamed of being Dracula, but maybe there are. Maybe Dracula is kind of an exotic, charismatic figure that people in their heart of hearts might think, gee, I wish I could be that.
Yeah.
But you can't as long as Bela Lugosi is in the way. So the idea that there was this guy who was just completely forgettable, who played the part, and it's still a Dracula movie, that might be reassuring to people. What do you think of my theory? Have I convinced you with this?
Yes.
All right, good.
I watched this one again today. I was like, this has to be where Mike Myers was inspired for his awesome powers.
Yes. Mike Myers has said that he was particularly influenced by You Only Live Twice because that was the easier one to make fun of.
Yeah.
But the elements in You Only Live Twice that he was making fun of made their first appearance in Dr. No.
Yeah.
So that's true. The things that are probably easiest to parody are also the things that make the Bond films as entertaining as they are.
Yeah.
So
there was a scene in this one after they take Honey Rider away to have their way with her, and they rough him up, and he wakes up in his cell, and he starts climbing through the air vents or whatever it's supposed to be, and then like all of a sudden, I guess it's hot. I guess there's like I guess it's the heat vents. I don't know, because it's like hot. He's got to take his shirt off to cover his hands up, and like all of a sudden, like rushing water comes through there. And when he comes out the other end, it's like, well, where did that water go? Because he just comes down to a hallway. I was like, did they do that just for like make it to spell like, oh, he's going to drown, and then
in a way, I mean, some people would say it's a flaw. It's illogical that they would have a ventilation system that runs through the whole place and has vents on all the walls, but there's water running through it, and apparently it gets so hot that you can actually burn yourself.
Yeah,
that's what a ventilation system is. But it might be that they were sort of having us on a little bit. They knew that that's an absurdity, but they liked the idea of having that sort of scene, right? And I guess when you think about it, what else would you do to sort of make a scene like that exciting? How can you make a guy crawling through a tunnel interesting unless there's some change in the tunnel, right? That is flooded with water, or it suddenly gets hot, or that is sort of like a signature of the Bond films. Things that when you think about it afterward, you say, "Oh, that's ridiculous."
Yeah.
But when you're watching it, you sort of go along with it. It seems fun, and it doesn't really get in the way of your enjoyment of the film. Maybe modern audiences would have a harder time with something like that, probably because it's been made fun of so much in Austin Power movies and things like that. there was a period there where this is sort of similar to what happened with the detective story movies that they were doing in the 30s and 40s. There was a period there where those films were so popular that the parodies was coming out almost at the same time.
Yeah.
Like you had the Philip Marlowe type, or Sam Spade type detective things, and immediately you have like Daffy Duck and Warner Brothers cartoons that
Yeah.
are making fun of it. Bob Hope doing his parodies of the detective genres, and with the Bond films too. There's a whole. I mean, the Bond films were so successful; it's like an industry
Yeah.
that sprung up. Italian rip-offs, and I guess the Germans got in on the act, and Americans were producing, and the effect of the Bond films was so great that even things that weren't really in the same genre were influenced by it. Everything was Bond during those times,
Oh, yeah.
including actual parodies like Get Smart, which was very popular for several years. So what is your favorite Bond film? Do you have a favorite?
I guess just for nostalgia reason, I would have to go with The View to a Kill, just because that was like the first one I'd really seen. There's obviously ones that are better, but
Well, I feel sorry that was the first one you've seen.
yeah.
Not that was particularly terrible, but
Yeah.
it was kind of a low ebb for the more Bonds. Who's
What's
your
your-
favorite Bond?
My favorite.
Did I beat you to it?
Well, I guess I was going to ask a different question, but I would say I think Sean Connery is probably he's probably the best Bond. Yeah.
I have a lot of affection for the Roger Moore years, but Sean Connery is really, it's just like we were talking about before. He is Bond, basically.
Yeah.
You know, he created the character. Maybe if they give Bond a rest for a while and come back with something, different, maybe we can be re-excited or re-energized about the series,
Yeah, I'd say take maybe 10, 15 years off. And then when you bring it back, you set it in the 60s to give it that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the one critical element is they have to find somebody who has that sort of effortless charm and appeal on the screen.
Yeah, and make it campy. Don't worry about
Yeah, a little bit of humor
Yeah.
would be nice. Yeah, I think one of the reasons
I always say campy, but I just mean like like the villain should just be kind of outrageous.
right,
You
a
know?
little more over the top than what we've been getting lately.
So do you recommend everybody watch Doctor No?
Yes, I suppose there's so many in the series we could probably do another couple of episodes.
Yeah, we
but-
probably could. Yeah.
but it's fun to talk about it. I definitely recommend Dr. No, and we'll look forward to seeing what else they do in the future.
Oh yeah.
I assume we're going to have another one soon, right?
They're going to have to.
Well, maybe I'll actually break my fast and go out and see it in the theaters.
There you go. All right. Well, this was a good episode, and everybody, thanks for listening to a podcast from Beyond, where we have gone beyond horror.